Alright, today I'm going to be going through this NV4500. We have it locked up. It looks like this input shaft is sheared off. I'm just going to go through, kind of all the beginning tips and tricks if you've never been inside one. Just kind of what to look for, what's important, and how to rebuild this and have, a very high success rate and get a lot of miles out of it. First thing I'm going to go through, kind of anytime you're going to rebuild anything is you want to clean it. We got a bunch of oil, dirt, grime. We got all the stuff in here. We don't want that on the inside of our transmission. So first I'm just going to go ahead and, clean this thing up. Alright, first thing we're going to do, we're going to get this, this mount off. This was just the initial cleaning. We're going to do a better job getting everything up afterwards. First, we're going to take off our top plate and our tail housing. So we got some pry tabs here. We get off our dowel pins. Make this straight up. Alright, so just looking at this, we got our input shaft, all of our teeth are sheared off here. Looking over here, the teeth are sheared off on the front of this input shaft. And with how much fluid and grease I saw on the back of this transmission, to me, this is looking like something, this thing probably ran low on oil. We probably have a leak somewhere in the back here, or it just, it just got to that point. And the reason I say that, I've built a lot of these, and the most common failure I see is actually this. And what happens is, your feed for this bearing that's in the front right here is this little hole. And, it's reliant on this gear oil splashing up and, falling back down in this hole to feed this bearing and, not only feed the front of this countershaft bearing. So when you start getting low on oil, you start building up a lot of heat right in here. In here, you got your first or fourth gears. Your fifth's going to be in this back tail housing area. And the nice thing about manuals is you visually can see that. Your teeth are all cut the same way on these front four gears. If this was here, it would look just like this one, a little smaller. So this is your first, this is your second, this is your third, this is your fourth, and then this is your reverse, and your fifth's obviously on the back side, and that's why you have, you have your 3 shift forks. You notice your 3 pegs in the top of your top plate. This is going to shift your 1, 2, this is going to shift your 3, 4, this is going to shift your 5 in reverse, which is connected to our pin on the back fork. Now, as far as taking this thing apart, we're going to get our tail housing off. We got to get our 5th gear off before we can pull this out. This whole main shaft's going to come out as one assembly. So we're going to go ahead and get this tail housing off. It's very helpful. You want to get these these 10 millimeters, these 12-point pens. You want to get them very clean. They usually, if these bolts were put back in here, they're usually going to have Loctite on them. Kind of a pain in the butt to get off. So you just want to make sure they're as clean as can be, and you're going to want to break them free by hand first. And if you feel yourself putting too much pressure on it, get a torch. So that's probably what we're going to do in this situation. But since I just sprayed all the brake clean, we're going to get this cleaned off first. Alright, so now that we got all our bolts out, we're going to get these two dowel pins to let go. So we're going to tap on here. We're going to take this off. A few teeth in there. And now we see our 5th gear. Actually looks pretty good, intact. This nut doesn't look like it's budged. We actually can spin it from this side. And so the reason we did not remove our input shaft at this time is to get this nut off, we're going to want to lock it in 2 gears. So we're going to grab our shifter up here if we can get it into gear and lock it into a different one. And be careful if you're going to use your reverse shifter here, because if you push it, which way is it? If you push it forward into gear, it can jump on the gear. It has enough play without the shifter rail sitting on it that it can move all the way forward, and this gear is gonna jump and just kind of makes it a pain in the butt to tear it apart. So then we're gonna get our wrench, and my favorite way to take these off, we're just gonna use a hammer. Alright, looks like we got a little bit of Loctite on here. Don't have any problem with that. I do not ever reuse these nuts, so this is, effectively trash. But the next thing we can do is pull this 5th gear off. The next piece we're going to take off is the shift fork here. Take ourselves, this is a, what is it? This is a 5/32 punch. We're going to take these 2 roll pins. Well, we're not going to do that. If you feel like you're putting too much stress on it, you're going to want to push it into gear, so we move it closer to the case. We have less leverage out here that we're making this pin bend, because we don't want to bend that. Alright, we're going to save our roll pins. Now we're going to remove this snap ring on the end using these snap-on snap ring pliers. I guess part number's worn off it, but any old snap ring pliers will do. Remove your snap ring. Take your clutch cone off. The way you always want to inspect your surface, see if you have any grooves, divots, any imperfections. And we're going to test fit with our new synchros after we get it cleaned up. Another thing to pay attention to is you'll notice at the front of these they have this 45 on each side, and this is your engagement. That makes it easier when that clutch cone slides over it. So you want to make sure those aren't flat. Any wear or grinding, anything like that. I try and keep these rings to stay on. You can pull it apart if you want. I always do it at the end. Here's our shift fork. And then we're going to have our washer. And then we have our inner bearing. And then the gear itself. Now with these 5th gears, you always want to, pretty much every gear you always check your teeth. See if you have any chips, cuts, anything, any signs of wear, any any divots. You also want to remove your dogs here. I'll try and get them to stay on so they don't fly out everywhere. But that's a common thing you might have shift concerns with. Another thing you'll notice with these sliders is they're tapered on one end, but as you see on one side, like that 45 that was on the clutch cone, you have a 45 in here as well. And that's the other thing you want to look for. You want to make sure these aren't flattened. You want to make sure they have good engagement. And you know, something that I was struggling with when I was first putting these together, I didn't see any videos on it, is, you know, which direction does this face? And I kind of just told you with these 45s, this is always, these 45s are going to go towards the synchro that it's trying to apply. So on this gear, you know, we're going to sit down on it, and to apply it, the synchro's on the outside. You know, if we're sitting here, our synchro's on the clutch face sitting on this. So these teeth are always going to point towards your synchro, because that's what's engaging. Is these two 45s make it a lot easier than something that has to fit perfectly meshed together. So that'll always tell you which way to put it on. And that's the 5th for our countershaft side. Another thing to check with this 5th gear is this is your rod, your shift linkage for it, because, you know, the clutch, the shift rail is going to sit right in here, and it's going to move these two back to engage it, and then, you know, it goes all the way forward to engage reverse, and we're sitting in the middle, we're at neutral. But you're going to want to check this pin back here. You want to, you know, kind of move it up and down at its farthest point, see how much play you have in it. You know, we have a little bit in it, but it's nothing crazy. You just want to make sure you don't have excessive play in here. You know, you could have issues popping out of gear, issues engaging gear, staying in gear. That's just something to check. That's also why we check our teeth on here. That's, you know, the other side of it. We're going to see engagement issues, or we're going to see popping out of gear, something like that. This just needs to be firm. You know, if you think about it, you're going down the road, this whole assembly is shaking around, bouncing around. You know, all it takes is it to move. You know, if it can move a little bit, it'll just pop, you know, pop right out of gear. So I'm using this this snap-on puller. This is a 4.5-inch puller, CJ951. Not a huge deal. I've done it with other pullers. This is just what I have at my disposal. Alright, here's our 5th gear for the main shaft. It does look like, no chips or burrs in here. That's all you're pretty much looking for with any gear. So we're good with that. Now we're going to go ahead and unlock it. Now we're going to remove our front and rear bearing retainers. Alright, we'll take our shims, we're going to set them aside. These 2 outer bearings are junk. And one thing I didn't catch before to show you is we're going to remove this anti-rotation pin that's in the counter shaft. Just make sure that goes back with this washer. That's all it's for. Alright, yeah, that bearing is grenaded. There is a tool they make, you can press this race out of here. You can put another one in there. But, you know, as many as I do, it saves me more time. And they're really cheap, like 40-50 bucks for a retainer. I usually just go ahead and get a new one, especially because this one's, you know, ground down on here. It looks like this throw-out bearing might have got hot too. So we're going to get rid of that. You know, this bearing's destroyed in the front. It's going to be a decent game if I can get this thing out of here. Yeah, this bearing is destroyed too. You know, usually when this thing runs dry, it you know, everything up here gets hot. The what should we call it? The tapered bearing up here, the roller bearing that rides down in here, and then you're also going to have, you know, another set of bearings. Well, obviously your countershaft bearing. You know, the synchro's destroyed. But once we have, you know, our rear and front retainers off, some of these you'll get away with. Some of them you will have to cut this bearing. But we can go ahead and try. Okay, so this is, I could just notice this because I've done enough of these, but on these aftermarket shafts, they do not have a press fit bearing on the rear. They have a slip fit. And their design is made to, you know, make these things a lot easier to rebuild, but all I'm going to do is pick up any tension on it. And I'm just going to remove that tapered bearing. This is trash. We're going to keep our washer. You'll notice this one has a taper on it. I'll show you how to keep track of those later. And this is a pretty example of something something you might run into. You know, you got a bearing failure in the front. This thing's heated. It's got a blue ring on it. You know, I see some clutch material that's burning here, but I really don't see anything physically wrong with this. Err on the side of caution. I'm going to put a new one in for them. And you can see this synchro is fried, so we're going to, I mean, all the synchros are, you know, trashed anyways, but that one's going to go. And then here's our other bearing. And you see this one is just locked up. It's trash as well. Alright, so now we got our main shaft separated. We're just going to set this aside just for a second, just so I can talk about this. You'll see, you know, obviously we know our input shaft was destroyed, so we can expect that our counter shaft's going to be destroyed. Not a big deal. Counter shafts aren't terribly expensive. You know, this is obviously way beyond use, so we're not going to use that. The other thing you'll notice right here is your reverse idler. We're going to take our pinky and slide this pin out, and then it's going to drop down. But what we have to do first is we're going to have to cut this bearing off just to get it out. You know, it's trash, and you can use a die grinder. You can chop this off, but since this shaft is unusable, I'm just going to, you know, beat this cage till it comes off. And the only reason I had to remove that bearing is you're not going to fit this counter shaft up out of here. It's so tight of a clearance that this bearing is going to contact this housing, and you're not going to get it out. So now we're going to turn our case on its side. We're going to let this arm fall down, and then we can remove our counter shaft. You know, like I said before, this thing is trashed. You know, this bearing that's submerged in oil, it looks all right. But just always be inspecting. If you are going to reuse the counter shaft, I always, you know, a new bearing comes in every kit, and you should always replace it. You're going to do basically the same thing you saw me do. You're going to cut this cage off, and then you're going to basically put a 45. Now, you know, this is recessed in here. It's hard to get to it, but you can do it with a die grinder. You're not going to be able to cut it straight. You're going to have to cut it a 45, and I don't always cut all the way through. You know, there's kind of a finesse to it, but I'm going to put a big groove in it. Then I'm going to take this punch, and I'm going to smack it as hard as I can right in that groove I made, intending to make it crack. And when it cracks, this will expand just a little bit, and it'll be enough for it to come off. You know, you might have to cut a little more, hit it again, try it, but I was trying not damage the surface under here. Now, if you do damage it, it's not the end of the world. The only problem I would ever have with it, if it no longer becomes a press fit bearing on here, I probably wouldn't roll with it. But other than that, you know, this thing's junk. I'm not going to waste any more time on it. We're going to get rid of it. All right, and then now we can pull our reverse idler out. There's two kinds you'll find. You'll either find a long one with a, you know, obviously a longer pin, bigger bearing, bigger roller. And you'll find those in the 97 and earlier models. Not much of a difference. Just a design change. You'll find one washer, and then we'll find a second washer, and they each go on either side. That's the nut I was using. But then, you know, that's your case clear. I'm going to pull these PTO covers off. I always replace the gaskets, but I'll do that afterwards. Now all I'm going to do is break down this main shaft. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to pull this third gear slider off. We're going to same inspection as we did on our fifth gear. You know, we're looking at these teeth, making sure they all have a nice 45 to them. We don't see any blunt ends, you know, from grinding. And this one looks pretty good. You know, on these, it's real common for your third gear synchro to be the first one to go. We're also going to pay attention to our divots. We're going to make sure these don't have any wear, excessive wear on the front. And then like this, you know, we had heat. So, you know, these springs, this spring is done. And, you know, we're probably just going to get us a new set of those and call it a day. So on some of these, they'll just slide right off, but you can see on this one it doesn't. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to break down this other side as far as I can first. So this is your reverse gear. We're going to pop it off. And just like before, now on Cummins units, they're going to have a slider with these retainers in it, these dogs, just because they're synchronized. You know, this is probably a better way for you to see it here, but you know, we have our 45s. You know, you'll notice that this has the tapered end on this side, but all we care about is this 45 facing our synchro, which will sit, you know, right down in here. And you have a 45 on here, contacting a 45 on here, contacting a 45 on the synchro hub. So from there, it just makes it so when you shift gears, you know, you know, whatever position it might be at, it'll always align itself, and that's its purpose. And if you understand the why behind it, you'll figure out, you know, how to put it back together right every time. So here's our roller bearing for that gear. You also want to pay attention if there's any, you know, divots or catching in here. Make sure all those surfaces are smooth. And then we're going to take this this nylon washer off of our snap ring. Keep that over there. We're going to take our snap ring pliers. Now this snap ring is a heck of a snap ring. And I feel even worse for you if whoever replaced it or worked on it last, you know, put this snap ring on upside down. But it's going to take everything I got to get this thing off. So now that I got it around, I'm just going to work it up until I can get my fingers under it. I mean, this thing is strong. It's gonna work you. But the thing I always want to caution, just making your life easier if you ever have to go on one of these again, is what you'll notice with these snap rings. It's kind of hard to tell on the camera, but what you'll see is if you look one way, the ends of these snap rings are cut at a 45, and you always want that 45 facing the top where my snap ring pliers are going to grab. And the reason behind that is if I flip it upside down, you know, my snap ring pliers don't really have a surface to grab. You know, they're going to grab, and that 45 is going this way now, it's just going to slip right up, and that's what makes it a pain in the butt if you put them in upside down. Now, if you do it the opposite way, you know, you put it in the right way, now you got this 45 for your pliers to grab onto, and, you know, you can't just yank it up. It'll stick and make it easier for you. So then we got our reverse synchro hub, and now we're going to pull our first gear off. It'll come straight up, just like that. And then I'm going to use a pocket screwdriver, get this snap ring out. All right, here's our roller bearing. You want to expect these for, you know, any pitting, any imperfections. These are reusable. They really don't see a load because, you know, all these gears are doing on it is they're just sitting on it, just rolling. They don't, you know, the more you're towing, you're not going to put any extra load on these. You're putting extra load on the gear face itself, and, you know, you'll know if that's broken. So now we got one snap ring. We're going to have our inner side of the clutch cone. We have our synchro, and we have our outer side of the clutch cone. Now these two together, you know, you want to inspect the surfaces equally, make sure they're smooth, you don't see any imperfections, any grooves that you can feel with your finger or your pick. And, you know, I'm going to clean these up with Scotch-Brite. as long as everything fits well in the new kit. So we're going to take our snap ring, put it over there, and now that I got enough space, use these snap ring pliers and take that off. And so now on this, this is our 1-2 slider. We're going to inspect it for any, any play or anything. I'm not going to break this down on this table because I don't have another set of these. But when you take them apart, it's the same as looking at any of these other dogs. You want to make sure there's no surface wear on this. You want to make sure these engagement teeth look good. And you usually don't see a whole lot wrong with these, but just make sure they hold, they hold in place. And then you're going to have the exact same setup over on our second gear. You're going to have your outer synchro hub, your synchro itself, and then you're going to have your inner synchro hub, which you got to take the other snap ring off for. Our snap ring, our inner synchro hub, and then our last snap ring. Alright, now we're back on this side with our third and second gear. And you can go about this a couple different ways. I like to use this punch. You can use a puller, but I'm going to hit it on this synchro face so I don't damage, the engagement teeth. Alright, so there's our third gear synchro, and now this is our 3-4 hub. And one thing you notice about this is, on here you have a surface, on here you have a surface. These are both thrust surfaces, but on this outside you're going to have this ring. And what this ring here is for, as you'll notice, is around all these spring holes, is it bleeds into there. And this is just a lube, a lube thing. It retains gear oil in here, and it's supposed to keep this thrust surface lubed. It's supposed to keep those bearings lubed. That's just the reasoning behind that. You can put it on either way, but it's meant for this outer ring to face the front of the case towards the input shaft, and it's just going to retain oil for you. So next we're going to pull our third gear off. We're going to inspect for the same things. Make sure our hub surface is good, our thrust surface is good, our bearing surface is good. And then you're going to inspect all these teeth, make sure you don't find any chips or cracks, nothing like that. And this one looks pretty good, so I'm going to go ahead and use that again. Now you're going to have your bearing, and then you're going to have another Teflon retainer on here. And the reasoning behind this Teflon piece is, if you'll notice with these caged bearings, they're not one piece, at least the newer ones, so they have this this lip in it. If you put it together without it, this lip could get caught. It could catch up that bearing, and then you have a bearing that's not rotating, the cage isn't free. You lock up, you create heat, and ultimately you create a failure. Same thing with this snap ring. This one isn't as big a deal as the other one because it's not, as big of a snap ring. But same thing, this snap ring has a 45 cut in it, and we're always going to want to make sure that 45 is down. Whereas, I'm going to show you visually here, this snap ring, the 45 is facing this way. So there's a 45 like this at the ends, and that's going to go down so that the tip always is towards the top. Then we can pull our thrust washer off, and now you'll notice this one is not tapered. That distinguishes it from the one that's on the rear. And the easiest way to think about it is, this is closest. This is on the reverse gear. This is the thrust washer on the reverse gear. So you think the tapered goes to the reverse, and then this flat washer is going to go on your second. Now on here we have a anti-rotation pin again. Make sure that it's going to go back where it belongs. And we're going to take our second gear off, and then our bearing. And now inspecting your shaft, a lot of times with input bearing failure, you're going to run this out of oil. And now I can't say for sure that this thing was run low on oil. This surface finish looks pretty good. Because really, if any of these bearings fail in the front of the case, everything gets so hot in here that it's going to just eat up everything. So that's just what I suspect in this case, but I can't be for sure. And this shaft really is reusable, but we're not going to use it, mainly because I want to add the 5th gear fix for this guy, which includes a 3-piece washer that goes on here. Now, the thing that's nice about this aftermarket shaft is you can see in the beginning, you know, I had to use a puller to get this 5th gear off. And the big problem with the Cummins is that this 5th gear fits so loose on a stock shaft that you have this play back and forth. And the thing you have to understand about when you have a gear that's cut at a 45, they're quiet, you know, they're the most efficient operation for the vehicles that we have. And but the problem they create is there's not, you know, the gears contact like this, right? You know, they're running like this, so they create a load on the you know, towards each other. You know, this gear's pushing against this gear. But when we have this 45 cut into them, not only does it create a load that goes, you know, perpendicular to the gears, or parallel to the gears, but you create a load that goes perpendicular. So not only is this gear pushing on the other gear on the load that way, but since it's at a 45, you also get some force pushing it this way or this way. And you know how we know which way it's going is depending on what the load is coming from. You know, when your foot's on the gas, your engine is driving your rear wheels, you push the gear one way. Now when you let off the gas and now you're just coasting down the road, those tires are now driving the engine, if that makes sense. And what that means is this gear is going to push the other way. And that creates a lot of factors that we have in this transmission. But the biggest one is our end plate, which is how much, you know, movement this whole assembly with everything together, these tapered bearings on the end, how much movement they have side to side. So when you're on the gas, you're going to push the whole assembly one way. When you let off, you're going to push it the other way. And that can cause some shift concerns if we have, you know, too much end play, because we're letting these gears have too much slop back and forth. You know, they can slide, and all it takes is a little bit for this, you know, slider hub. All it takes is a little bit of movement, and then if this thing starts moving, it'll go all the way. And that, you know, that might be the reason you have some issues popping out of gear, something like that. But it's just some food for thought. So we're gonna get this thing out of here. And now all we're gonna do is I have some mineral spirits. I'm just going to go ahead and clean up all these gears and then brake clean them off, and we're going to start assembling everything back together. Synchro surfaces and, you know, this thrust face, I'm going to use some Scotch-Brite. Just going to take you know, any surface imperfections I have off. So here we got our new nut, washer, we have some set screws, and then we have our 5th gear fix. So right here with our main shaft, we're gonna have to clean it off. You know, it's covered in wax here. I'll do that here in a second. But I want to show you kind of what this fifth gear fix does. So basically, you know, we do go back. We have this this slip fit. You know, this fit of our fifth gear on here. This washer is going to go on here. It's going to go on here. These two pieces. So this piece can't come up, and then this is going to go on the end, and that just makes it so even if this nut, you know, does come off, you know, if this nut is to back off, this gear still can't. It does, you know, as you see, it has no more play. There's no play in this gear. It can't come off because this lip is inside the shaft. And I've never had a fifth gear nut come off of this, you know, after using this kit. And this is how most, you know, fifth gear main shaft sets come now. You get this 3-piece washer. I wish they'd make it available so you could buy just this washer, because more times than not, you know, I've taken apart units that have this in here, and you know, they destroy something in the back end and it destroys this, and you can't get this by itself, so you got to buy a whole nother shaft. It is kind of a pain in the butt, but our, you know, rebuild kit, this is my favorite kit to use. I've had 0 issues out of this kit. Everything always seems to fit right. You know, I've used some other brands. I'm not going to name out any brands, but this one I've yet to have a problem with anything out of the box. Everything has, you know, it seems to have good quality control. You know, I have an expectation of what I'm getting. You know, they're a little more pricey, but these coil bearings are very nice. You know, haven't had any issues out of these. So we get our 4-wheel drive, our transfer case gasket. We get our PTO gaskets. You know, I'm gonna set these to the side for now. And we're just gonna go ahead and open up everything. And so out of this kit, you know, you never want to throw anything away until you're done. But you're going to need, so you're going to have 2 types here. You have this open type and these flat ends, which most every unit you're going to see. This is for your top plate. You're going to need these 3 pieces. These are on very select units. You're obviously going to need your 4 bearings, taper bearings, part of your input shaft, your input bearing. This is the seal in the front of the case. This is if you have a 2-wheel drive Cummins unit. This would be if you have, or this is part of your input seal. This is for 4-wheel drive Dodge units, and then this is for 4-wheel drive Chevy units or some of the gasser Dodge units. And then obviously you have your synchros. It's you know, pretty straightforward. Not a whole lot to this kit. You know, we got a 4-wheel drive, so we're going to basically use everything seen here. Alright, so the first thing we're going to grab, I have some gear oil here. We're going to let our synchros take a bath. You know, we're going to want to get these just covered, let them soak up for a little bit.